The first time I saw strangers swimming in my pool, I honestly thought I was looking at the wrong backyard. I know that sounds ridiculous, but that's genuinely where my brain went first. I had just gotten back from the grocery store on a hot Saturday afternoon, carrying 2 bags of food through my kitchen when I glanced out the window and froze. There were people everywhere. Towels spread across my patio furniture. A Bluetooth speaker blasting country music. Somebody floating on a giant inflatable swan like they were spending the weekend at a resort. And right in the middle of it all sat a woman named Brooke Dalton, sunglasses on, wine glass in hand, laughing like she owned the place. I remember standing there for a good 10 seconds, completely motionless, trying to figure out if I was having some kind of heat stroke. Because here's the thing. That pool was behind my house, inside my fenced backyard, in a gated neighborhood. There was absolutely no logical reason for strangers to be there. Now, before I tell you how that situation spiraled completely out of control, you need a little background. My name's Ryan Mercer. I'm 39 years old, divorced, and for the last 5 years I've worked remotely as a software consultant. After my marriage ended, I sold the family home outside Denver and moved to a quiet neighborhood in Henderson, Nevada. Nothing fancy, just a peaceful place where nobody bothered anybody. That was the goal. I wasn't looking for excitement anymore. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I just wanted a house with a decent backyard, a pool, and enough privacy that I could sit outside after work with a beer and not hear somebody else's drama through the fence. For about 8 months, that's exactly what I got. Then Brooke moved in. You ever meet someone who somehow manages to make every conversation about themselves without you realizing it until afterward? That was Brooke. She was probably in her mid-40s, always dressed like she was heading to a networking event nobody else had been invited to. Designer sunglasses. Perfect hair. Luxury SUV. The kind of person who said things like, "People always come to me for leadership," completely unprompted. Within 3 months of moving into the neighborhood, she joined the HOA board. That probably should have been my first warning sign. At first, she was annoying in the normal HOA way. Complaining about trash bins. Complaining about paint colors. Complaining about somebody's basketball hoop being visible from the street. One week, she actually started a discussion about whether wind chimes created unnecessary emotional stress for nearby homeowners. I wish I were making that up. Still, annoying neighbors aren't exactly rare. I figured I'd ignore her and keep living my life. Then one evening, my next-door neighbor, Marcus, texted me. "Hey man," he wrote, "you having people over today?" I wasn't. I told him no. A few seconds later, he sent me a blurry photo taken from across the street. 3 women were sitting beside my pool. One of them was Brooke. At first, I assumed there had to be some misunderstanding. Maybe they were looking at houses. Maybe somebody had given them permission. Maybe there was some explanation that made sense. So later that evening, I walked down to Brooke's house and knocked on her door. She answered holding a glass of white wine. The second I mentioned my pool, she smiled. "Oh my God," she said. "That was your house? You still here?" "Yeah," I said. "Pretty sure." She laughed. Actually laughed. Then shrugged. "Well, your backyard looked empty." That was her explanation. Not sorry. Not embarrassed. Just, your backyard looked empty. I remember forcing a little smile because I wasn't quite ready to process how insane that sounded. Then she added something that would stick with me for months. "You should take it as a compliment," she said. "You have a beautiful pool." At the time, I convinced myself it was just a weird misunderstanding. An awkward moment. A strange neighbor doing something stupid. The kind of story you'd laugh about later. I had no idea that 2 weeks later, I'd come home and find Brooke and 4 of her friends drinking cocktails beside my pool again. Only this time, they weren't just in my backyard. They'd gone inside my house. And the second I realized that, something changed. Because what had started as a bizarre misunderstanding suddenly felt like something much darker. Something deliberate. Something I was only getting started. The second time I caught Brooke in my backyard, the weirdness disappeared and pure disbelief took its place. I pulled into my driveway after lunch on a Sunday and immediately heard music coming from behind the house. Not loud, not party loud, just comfortable. The kind of volume people use when they feel completely at home. The moment I opened the side gate, I saw them. Brooke. For women I didn't recognize. A guy standing by the grill. Drinks on my patio table. wet towels hanging over my chairs. And sitting right in the middle of everything was a fruit tray from my kitchen. My kitchen. For a second, nobody even reacted. That's what made it feel so surreal. They weren't acting like trespassers. They were acting like guests. Brooke looked up first. "Oh, good," she said casually. "You're back. You're back." Like I'd returned early from a business trip and interrupted her afternoon. I remember looking around the yard trying to decide if I was angry or just confused. "What exactly are you doing?" I asked. She took a sip of her drink. "Relax," she said. "We're just cooling off." One of her friends actually waved at me. Waved. Like we're neighbors running into each other at the grocery store. I pointed toward the pool. "This isn't a community amenity." Brooke smiled. "Your gate was unlocked." To this day, that sentence still annoys me more than almost anything else she ever said. The confidence, the certainty, the idea that an unlocked gate somehow erased ownership. I told them to leave. At first politely, then much less politely. Eventually they gathered their things and headed out, but Brooke made sure she was the last one to go. She stopped at the gate, turned around, and gave me that same smile. "You'd probably enjoy life more if you loosened up." Then she left. That night, I barely slept. Not because I felt threatened, because I couldn't stop replaying the interaction, the entitlement, the complete lack of embarrassment, the certainty that she would face absolutely no consequences. And over the next few weeks, things got worse. Much worse. I'd come home and find patio furniture moved around. Empty cans in the outdoor trash. Wet footprints on the concrete. Once I found cigarette ash near the deep, and even though nobody in my family smoked. Every time I confronted Brooke, she denied everything immediately. "Oh, sweetheart, are you sure?" Or, "That's a pretty serious accusation." Or, "Oh, my personal favorite. Can you actually prove any of that?" She always smiled while saying it. Always. At some point, I realized the smile was intentional. It wasn't friendliness. It was armor. A way of making every accusation sound ridiculous before anyone could take it seriously. Marcus kept telling me to install cameras. Honestly, I should have listened sooner. But part of me still believed this whole thing would eventually burn itself out. I didn't want neighborhood drama. I didn't want HOA meetings turning into reality television. I definitely didn't want police reports involving swimming pools. Then 4th of July weekend arrived, and that's when everything shifted. The neighborhood hosted its annual block party near the clubhouse. Families everywhere. Kids running around with sparklers. People pretending they knew how to grill. The usual suburban chaos. I almost skipped it, but Marcus convinced me to come. About 20 minutes after we arrived, Brooke spotted me. I knew it immediately. Some people don't walk toward you. They make entrances. Brooke was one of those people. "Ryan," she shouted across the lawn. I nodded politely and kept walking. She intercepted me anyway. "How's the famous pool?" A few people nearby laughed awkwardly. They could sense tension, but didn't know why. I smiled, still attached to my house. That got a bigger laugh. For just a split second, I saw irritation flash across her face. Then it disappeared. "You know," she said loudly, "it's kind of selfish keeping all that space to yourself." There it was. Selfish. As if private property had somehow become a moral failing. I looked directly at her. Most people call that ownership. This time the smile slipped longer. Not much. Just enough. Then she stepped closer and lowered her voice. "You really need to stop making such a big deal out of this." I frowned. She continued. "People are starting to think you're becoming paranoid." That hit differently. Not because it hurt. Because suddenly everything made sense. The comments. The rumors. The strange looks from people I barely knew. Brooke wasn't just trespassing. She was shaping the narrative. Planting little seeds. Poor Ryan seems stressed lately. Ryan gets worked up over strange things. Ryan thinks everyone's out to get him. Nothing direct. Nothing obvious. Just enough to influence perception. That's when Marcus stepped in. "Actually," he said calmly, "I've seen your SUV at his place." Brooke didn't even look at him. "Maybe both of you need hobbies." Then she walked away laughing. I stood there watching her leave. And for the first time, I stopped hoping she'd eventually stop. Because she wasn't making mistakes. She was making choices. Monday morning, I called a security company. The owner was an older guy named Carl. Retired military. Quiet. Professional. The kind of man who looked at problems like puzzles. As we walked around the backyard, I explained everything. Halfway through my story, he stopped near the gate. Then he said something I still remember. People test boundaries. I nodded. He continued. When nothing happens, they stop seeing those boundaries. That was exactly it. By then, Brooke wasn't treating my property like someone else's. She was treating it like hers. So we went all in. Hidden cameras, motion alerts, cloud storage, multiple angles, every entrance covered, every corner visible. By the end of the installation, Carl looked around and laughed. Who exactly are we preparing for? I smiled. A woman with too much confidence. The cameras solved one problem. Evidence. But they didn't solve another. Brooke herself. A week later, I met my friend Lauren for drinks downtown. Lauren had spent years teaching chemistry before switching careers. Halfway through my rant, she started laughing. Not a little laugh. The kind where she nearly spilled her drink. What? I asked. She wiped her eyes. You know they're tracing dyes for pools, right? I blinked. What does that mean? And then she explained. Certain harmless maintenance dyes remain nearly invisible in water, but become highly visible when transferred onto skin, concrete, fabric, or dry surfaces. Nothing dangerous, just noticeable, very noticeable. Immediately my brain started connecting dots. Lauren noticed. Oh no, she said. Then she pointed directly at me. Whatever you're thinking, don't commit a felony. I laughed. No felonies. But for the rest of that night, the idea stayed in my head. Not because I wanted revenge. At least that's what I told myself. I wanted proof. Something undeniable. Something Brooke couldn't smile her way out of. A consequence she couldn't explain away. Over the next few days, I tested everything carefully. Safe. Temporary. Harmless. The first test left faint blue footprints on my patio. I stared at them for almost a full minute. Then I laughed out loud. Because for the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't reacting anymore. I was preparing. And I had a feeling Brooke Dalton was about to walk directly into the biggest mistake she'd made since moving into the neighborhood. Saturday morning arrived faster than I expected. I woke up, poured myself a cup of coffee, and opened the neighborhood Facebook page. The very first post I saw was from Brooke. Community spaces thrive when people learn to share. Let's all remember that being a good neighbor matters more than being possessive. No names. No direct accusations. She didn't need them. The comments underneath were exactly what you'd expect. So true. Couldn't agree more. Some people forget what community means. I stared at the screen for a few seconds. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, because somehow she convinced herself she was the victim. That afternoon, I unlocked the side gate. Then I left. At least that's what it looked like. In reality, I parked 3 streets away and walked back through a trail behind the neighborhood until I reached Marcus's house. From his upstairs office, you could see almost my entire backyard through a gap between the trees. Marcus adjusted the blinds. This feels illegal. It isn't. It feels illegal. Close enough. For nearly 2 hours, nothing happened. I started wondering if maybe she'd gotten cautious. Maybe she'd finally figured out she'd pushed too far. Then, around 2:30, Marcus leaned forward. Oh no. I looked over. What? There she is. The white SUV rolled slowly down the street. Right on schedule. Brooke stepped out first. 4 women climbed out after her. A man carrying a cooler followed behind. And then something happened that honestly still amazes me. None of them hesitated. Not for a second. They walked straight through my gate like they had every right to be there. No question. No nervous glances. No discussion. Just confidence. The cameras captured everything. Brooke leading the group. People setting down bags. Towels unfolding. Music starting. Drinks appearing. Within minutes they were swimming. Laughing. Relaxing. One woman even filmed a social media video beside the waterfall feature I'd spent months saving for after my divorce. Then came a moment that perfectly summed up Brooke. She stood beside the pool holding her phone and said, "This is honestly my favorite hidden spot in the entire neighborhood." Marcus nearly fell out of his chair. I just shook my head. The crazy part wasn't the trespassing anymore. It was how normal everyone acted. Nobody questioned it. Nobody asked whose property they were on. Because Brooke had already built a story in their heads. A story where she belonged there. And once people accept a story, they stop asking questions. Around 4 o'clock, they started climbing out of the water. And that's when everything changed. The first woman stepped onto the concrete, then froze. She looked down. Blue footprints. Bright blue. For a second, nobody understood what they were seeing. Then another woman noticed her hands. Blue. The guy with the cooler looked at his arms. Blue. A towel touched someone's leg. Blue streak. Another person grabbed their cover-up. Blue stain. Within 30 seconds, the entire backyard erupted into confusion. What is that? Oh my God. Why am I blue? Is this chlorine? Is this dangerous? People started talking over each other. One woman ran to the outdoor shower. Another pulled out her phone and started searching symptoms online. The guy with the cooler looked genuinely concerned. He was developing some rare tropical disease. And standing in the center of it all was Brooke. Because she'd spent the longest time in the pool, the dye was far more visible on her. Blue footprints, blue fingertips, blue stains running along the bottom of her white cover-up. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked uncertain. Not scared. Not yet. Just uncertain. Then I walked through the side gate. Nobody noticed me immediately. They were too busy panicking. Then Brooke turned around. The second she saw me standing there calmly holding my phone, her face changed. I'll never forget that moment. Because it wasn't shock. It was recognition. The realization that she had lost control of the story. Hey, Brooke. Silence. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. One woman stood frozen beside a chair, holding a blue-stained towel. Brooke finally found her voice. What did you do? I shrugged. Nothing harmful. Then I smiled. It'll disappear in a couple of days. Nobody spoke. I took another step forward. But thanks for helping me test the system. The expression on her face was worth every second of planning. Because now she understood. The cameras. The gate. The timing. Everything. You can't do this, she snapped. I held up my phone. Actually, I can. Then I showed her. Multiple camera angles. Timestamps. Clear footage. Every single person entering the property. Swimming. Drinking. Using the backyard. Everything. Completely undeniable. And that's when the real surprise happened. One of Brooke's friends stared at the screen, then looked directly at her. Wait. Her voice was quiet. You told us he knew. The backyard became even quieter. Another woman looked confused. You said this wasn't a problem. The guy with the cooler slowly picked up his bag. I think I'm leaving. Smart man. Because suddenly the entire dynamic shifted. People weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at Brooke. And for the first time, she couldn't charm her way out of it. Everybody calm down, she snapped. But her voice sounded different now. Tighter. Desperate. I looked around at the group. No one's in danger. Then I pointed toward the cameras. But all of this is documented. Within minutes, people started leaving. Nobody wanted to be part of the situation anymore. Nobody wanted their face attached to trespassing footage. Eventually, only Brooke remained. She stood near the gate staring at me. Then she said something that finally explained everything. You think you're better than everyone else. I honestly laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was revealing. Somewhere along the way, she'd convinced herself that this had never been about property. It had become personal. A story she'd created where I was arrogant, selfish, privileged. And once she believed that story, crossing boundaries stopped feeling wrong. It felt justified. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said the only thing that felt true. I don't think I'm better than anybody. She said nothing. I continued. I just think everybody deserves boundaries. For the first time, she had no response. A few seconds later, she walked away. And that should have been the end. But neighborhoods don't work that way. By Monday morning, everyone knew. Apparently, one of Brooke's friends posted a picture of the blue footprints online. Then somebody turned it into a meme. Then somebody made another one. Within a week, the entire neighborhood had seen some version of the story. The HOA requested copies of the footage. I filed an official trespassing report. Nothing dramatic happened after that. No courtroom. No screaming matches. No revenge campaign. Just consequences. About 3 weeks later, Brooke quietly resigned from the HOA board. Officially, it was for personal reasons. Unofficially, well, people could draw their own conclusions. A month later, she moved out. And honestly, that's the part one still think about. Not the victory, not the memes, not the blue footprints. The look on her face when she realized everyone saw her differently. Because if I'm being completely honest, sometimes I wonder whether I went too far. I know most people hear this story and immediately say she deserved it. Maybe she did. She ignored warnings, crossed boundaries, manipulated people, treated someone else's home like it belonged to her. But public humiliation hits differently when you're standing close enough to see it happen. Even now, years later, I still sit by that same pool some evenings and think about how strange people can become when pride gets involved. Maybe the pool was never really the issue. Maybe respect was. Maybe control was. Maybe both of us got caught in something bigger than a simple property dispute. I don't know. Why to know is this? Nobody ever entered my backyard again, and the gate stays locked. So now I want to hear from you. Did Brooke get exactly what she deserved? Or did I cross a line by turning the lesson into a public embarrassment? If someone repeatedly ignored your boundaries after multiple warnings, how far would you go before making sure they finally understood? Let me know in the comments. Because even after everything that happened, I'm still not completely sure where justice ends and revenge begins.